Okay, and we're back. Welcome back to the next lesson. I hope your exercises went well from the last one. Now we're talking about goals, and I'm going to say this a lot throughout the lessons in this course, but this one is very, very important. They're all important, but goals are what I consider to be the starting point of all time management. So we really need to get a good foundation here. You have to know what you want to achieve specifically, how to set goals, and then everything else with time management is going to fall in line after that. So with that out of the way, let's move forward with the lesson. So just imagine for a second that you're attempting to run a race and there's no finish line. What would be the point? No matter how hard you trained, no matter how hard you ran, there'd still be no way to win. And like I said, the starting point of all time management is goals. The starting point of virtually everything else in life is also goals. And if you don't believe me, just consider how you started your day this morning. I'm willing to bet that you woke up, ate breakfast, drank coffee, got a shower, and got dressed. Now, maybe you didn't do all of these things, and if you did, maybe you didn't do them in that exact order. But the point I'm trying to get at here is that you started setting and achieving goals from the moment that you got out of bed. And when it comes to your studying, if you don't direct your focus towards specific goals, most, if not all of your effort is going to be wasted. Now, psychology shows us that we're happiest when we're progressing towards our most important goals. Here's a quote from the famous basketball player who I'm sure everyone's heard of, Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan once said that the game has its ups and downs, but you can never lose focus of your individual goals, and you can't let yourself be beat because of lack of effort. Now, a really interesting fact about Michael Jordan is that he was actually cut from his basketball team back in high school. Now, many people would have given up if they were in Michael Jordan's shoes, and it would have been perfectly understandable if he had quit. After all, if he can't make it onto the high school basketball team, what future did he have in basketball, right? Well, that kind of thinking would have been turned out to be way wrong because he didn't give up and he went on to become one of the greatest pro basketball players, if not the greatest of all time. Michael Jordan also once said that whenever I was working out and got tired and figured I ought to stop, I'd close my eyes and see that list in the locker room without my name on it. Instead of getting angry and just leaving it at that, what Jordan did was he channeled his frustration into his basketball. And it paid off hugely for him because he was massively successful as a basketball player. But just imagine, if Michael Jordan had given up on his goals, we never would have had Michael Jordan. No one would know who he was. But he didn't. He persevered no matter what. And there's a good chance, that whatever your goals are in life, they probably have nothing to do with becoming a professional basketball player. But regardless, if you're willing to persevere long enough, you can achieve just about anything you want to achieve in life. But it's not going to happen by accident. You have to set goals, and you have to go after them with everything you've got. So a natural question that you might be thinking right now is, after all this talk about goals, how do you set them? Well, there's no right or wrong way, but there are definitely better and worse ways, and I'm going to present to you a simple framework called the SMART criteria for goal setting. And it's a really effective method, and SMART, what it stands for is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. And we're going to get into these each individually in just a second here, but first, let me just give you a brief explanation of how we know SMART goals work, because you don't want to waste your time. I don't want to waste your time. I'm sure you want to get started making progress, so, why should you use this method? Well, there were two professors at the University of Western Florida, and they did a study on the effectiveness of SMART goals. In 2010, they gave their students a team project, and they didn't require the students to use SMART goals. Then the next year in 2011, they assigned the same project, but they required the students to use the SMART goals. What happened? The students who used the SMART goals not only had higher grades than the other group, but they also started the project earlier, enjoyed their work more, and were more motivated. If you've never set goals before, it might surprise you how well this method works. So again, there's studies backing this up, and I can testify from my own experience that these components should be present, whether you think of them in terms of the SMART criteria or not. You need these criteria to be present in order to maximize your efficiency. So let's look at these. So the S stands for specific. Specific in contrast to vague. So vague goals are better than no goals, but you're more likely to achieve a goal if it's specific. So let's say your goal is to get good grades. Maybe you're a college student. Your goal for the semester is to get good grades. Well, what does that mean? It's very vague, right? So, just setting your goal as to get good grades, well, certainly that's better than going in and just flying blindly by the seat of your pants with no idea of what you want to achieve. But the thing is, good goals aren't very specific, right? Good grades aren't very specific, right? So to somebody, a good grade might be just passing all their classes, the old D's or C's get degrees thing. But for other students, anything less than an A is going to be unacceptable, and it's going to be basically in their mind a total failure. So we have to be specific about what you want to achieve. So if you set goals this way and you haven't specified what kind of grades you want, just saying that you want good grades, it's not really going to cut it, right? So you're better off making your goal, I want to get straight A's, or I want to get a 3.7 GPA at minimum, whatever it is, be specific. It could be a test. If you're studying for a test, rather than just making your goal to do really well on the test, be more specific. Make it your goal to get a 95 on the test, or a 98 on the test, or 100 on the test, or whatever it may be. So your goals also have to be measurable. And there's a saying from management expert and Presidential Medal of Freedom winner Peter Drucker that goes like this: if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. Having checkpoints in place to tell you whether you're on track to achieve a goal is crucial. For example, if your goal is to get an A in a class, but you failed your first quiz, then you're obviously off course. You're not on track to achieve the goal, so that should tell you that you have to go back and adjust your strategy. For college students, this one's going to be pretty easy. Every quiz, test, and assignment project that you do should tell you if you're headed towards your goal grade or not. Now, if you're studying for a test like, say, the LSAT, then your practice test scores are a way to measure whether you're moving towards your goal score or not. So you're studying for the LSAT, you have your goal score, because we already know that you need to be specific with your goals. You take a practice test and your score is lower than your goal score, right, on the practice test. So that tells you that you have some work to do before you take the real thing. Okay, so A stands for achievable, and this is really just another way of saying realistic. The goals that you set need to be realistic, and there are two ways that people get this wrong. The first is to aim too low. So you want to set goals that are going to get you outside of your comfort zone, because if you don't challenge yourself, you're not going to grow. It's just going to lead to stagnation. But unfortunately, way too many people shortchange themselves because they're afraid of failure. Failure never feels good, but sometimes you have to fail in order to learn an important lesson that's going to let you succeed in the future. Just like Michael Jordan. So whenever you set a goal, ask yourself if there's a chance that you might fail. If there's no chance at all that you might fail, how do you know if you're even going to grow from the goal? What's the point in doing it? Now, you can also take this way too far by not using common sense. The goals you set need to be high, but at the same time understand that if your goal's so high that reaching it's virtually impossible, you're probably just going to cause yourself a lot of pain and frustration, right? Aiming for a perfect score on a test like the GRE might not be an achievable goal for you, right? Very few people ever get perfect scores, if it's ever even been done. I'm sure somebody has, but it's got to be really rare. You can look up the numbers, the statistics, I don't know it off the top of my head, but it's got to be really rare. So that's probably not the best goal to strive for, right? But aiming for a score that's slightly above average but specific is probably going to be a good goal for you, right? So now, I'm by no means saying if you're studying for the GRE right now that you can't get a perfect score. I'm just stating that striving for absolute perfection on something like that is not going to be achievable for most people, right? So let me give you another example here. When I was younger, like in middle school, I used to skateboard, right? And I skated for a couple years. I wasn't that great. I had some tricks I could do. It was fun, but I wasn't that great at it. And so for me, I haven't skated in years, probably going on at least 10 years now. For me to make my goal to go out and win the X Games skateboarding, right, to win the X Games in one of the skateboarding divisions, that would just not be achievable, right? Like I said, had some tricks when I used to skate, but I wasn't that great. So for me, it's just probably not going to happen no matter how hard I worked. That goal would just cause me a lot of frustration. Now, luckily, I don't really care if I'm good at skateboarding or not. I just use that as an example. But, you want to set goals that are high, right? If you set a goal that's something you already know how to do, something that there's really no chance of any kind of failure at all, then, you're probably not setting your goal too high. But at the same time, if you aim at something that's too high, you got to use common sense, because it's probably just going to end up making you frustrated. Okay? So on screen, here's a diagram that I made to illustrate this critical point. Right? So the smaller orange circle, let that represent your comfort zone. And the larger blue circle, let that represent the growth zone. What I call the growth zone anyway. So whenever you set a goal that's outside of your comfort zone, by definition, it's not going to be comfortable. You might experience some kind of degree of stress, anxiety, or frustration, and this is coming because you're challenging yourself, and note that it's perfectly normal. In fact, it's actually healthy if you're picking a rewarding goal. So you need to set goals that are going to stretch you outside of your comfort zone. And if you don't do this, you're never going to grow. But at the same time, if you set a goal that's too far beyond what you're capable of doing, you're going to set yourself up for frustration. Okay, so another way to look at this is to imagine being on the outside of a doorway. Now, your goal, whatever it is that you want, is on the other side. And whatever it is, you can have it, but you just have to find a way to break through. Now, you might have to kick, you might have to push, you might have to scream, you might even have to slam against that door with everything that you've got. But if you just persevere long enough, the door is going to give way eventually, and everything that you want, whatever your goal is on the other side. Right, so standing outside of the door is like being in your comfort zone. You've got to get out of it to grow. You've got to bust through that door in order to grow, even though it's challenging, right? So if you want to bust through the door, you're going to meet with resistance. And however hard your goal is, the harder your goal is, I should say, the more resistance you're going to meet with, the more self-doubt, the more worry, frustration, anxiety, the more obstacles that are going to come up, right? But you can bust through if you just keep persevering. But just keep in mind that you need to set your goals high. Way too many people shortchange themselves, so I don't want you to shortchange yourself, but at the same time, you want to set goals that are going to be challenging for you, but that are realistic and that are achievable, or else it's going to be a losing battle. Look at this door here on screen. No one's going to break through that, right? Now, there's one strategy, though. I should mention the flip side of this. Now, there's actually a strategy where you set a goal that's something that's like insanely high. I think there's an old quote. I can't remember word for word what it was, but it goes something like this. Shoot for the moon, because if you miss, you're still going to end up hitting the stars. Meaning, if you set a goal that's just insanely high and you go after it with everything that you've got, and you tell yourself that you can reach it, and you go after it like you can, you're probably still not going to reach it, but you might get close, right? You're probably going to end up pretty close, and you're going to be way better off than you would have been otherwise, right? So something that some people might do is if you're taking a test, like a standardized test, you might make your goal to be a perfect score, and you study as if you want to get that perfect score. You study as if you want to get that 100%, and, knowing in the back of your mind that very few people get 100%, especially if it's something like the GRE or the LSAT. I don't even know, like I said, I don't know the facts about, how many people do this, but I'm guessing it's very, very, very few people. But if you make that your goal and you study like you can achieve it, then, you'll still probably end up getting really close, and, you'll still get a really high score. But the strategy is not for everybody because, like I said, it can cause you a lot of frustration. So it's up to you, but I just wanted to mention this here. But for the sake of the SMART criteria, the letter A stands for Achievable, and the takeaway, I've said it a couple times, I'll mention it one more time, the main takeaway here is that you want to set goals that are very high, you want to set goals that are challenging, but not so much that reaching them is going to be virtually impossible. Okay, so the R stands for relevant, and let me draw a quick distinction here between short-term and long-term goals. Long-term goals are the goals that you hope to achieve in the future. They're the big picture, the big things you want to accomplish. And the short-term goals are smaller goals that you need to accomplish along the way in order to reach the long-term goals. So for example, let's say that one of your long-term goals is to graduate from college with honors, while a short-term goal might be to get a good grade on a test that you have coming up in a few weeks. Again, the short-term goals are just objectives that you strive to accomplish on a daily, weekly, or a monthly basis in pursuit of your long-term goals. Any long-term goal can be achieved by breaking it down into a series of short-term goals. And the key is that your short-term goals need to be relevant to your long-term goals, or else you're just wasting your time. Right? So make sure that what you're doing what you're spending your time on every day is actually going to get you closer to achieving your goals, right? So if you're a college student and let's say your goal is to get into medical school, well, you're going to need to spend a lot of time studying, and joining clubs and extracurriculars is great, and you should do it. But you don't want to spend all your time going off in all these clubs that have nothing to do with medicine. You don't want to get involved in activities that are going to suck too much of your time up, and aren't going to leave you enough time to study, because you need to get good grades. No one wants to go to a doctor who can't get good grades, right? So just keep that in mind. Whatever your goals are, maybe it's medicine, maybe it's something else, but whatever you're doing on a daily basis, you want to try to make sure that it's relevant to your long-term goals, or else you're just kind of throwing your time out. And lastly, goals need to be timely, and this might be the most important one here. I would say the two most important are making sure your goals are specific and making sure they're timely. Now, timely just means that your goal should have a deadline to it, right? And we're going to talk about this a little bit more later in the course. There's an old adage known as Parkinson's Law that basically says, work expands to the time that you give it, right? Something like that. So basically meaning that, if you give yourself more time to do a task, it's going to take you longer to do it. If you give yourself 10 hours to do something, you might spend the whole 10 hours doing it. But if you give yourself 2 hours to do that same task, you might be surprised that you can get it done in 2 hours. So for every goal that you set, you want to make sure to give yourself a deadline, and you want to make sure that you're meeting that deadline. All right, so we're at the end of the lesson. So the exercise here, this might be the most important one in the whole course. I know you're probably going to hear me say that, stuff like that, often throughout this course, because the truth is I really like talking about this stuff, but this one really is one of the most important. You have to do this. Please don't move on until you've taken a couple minutes to do this. So the exercise is simply to write down 3 to 5 of your biggest goals. Studies even say that you're at least 42% more likely to achieve your goals when you write them down. So get out a piece of paper, an index card, whatever it is. You can type it too, but I recommend handwriting them. But take some time, write down 3 to 5 of your biggest goals: academic, health, financial even. It doesn't really matter for the purposes of this course. I would say focus on academic goals, but you can write down whatever you want. Just get 3 to 5 of your biggest goals down. You can do more if you want, but I think 3 to 5 is a good number. All right, and so your exercise, the second exercise here, is as you go throughout the day, keep asking yourself if how you're spending your time is moving you closer or farther away from achieving the goals. So the goals that you're going to write down, if you haven't already, those 3 to 5 goals that you're going to write down, as you go throughout your day, keep asking yourself if how you're spending your time is moving you closer to achieving them or further away. And this is just a rule of thumb. It's not something you want to take too literally, but just keep that in the back of your mind throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the rest of your year, throughout the rest of your life even, dare I go that far. Keep that in the back of your mind that, how you're spending your time, if it's not moving you closer towards your goals, try to minimize it as much as possible. And again, that's a rule of thumb. Don't take that too literally. But as you go throughout the day, again, put this into practice. And again, even if as you go throughout your day, here's something else you can do. Whenever you go through a doorway, just remember what I was telling you about getting outside of your comfort zone, making sure that you're going after goals that are going to stretch you to grow, right? So remember, bust through that door and do the exercises, and we'll pick up again in the next lesson.